Welcome back. We have John, the Professor Grech, back again, the history teacher from Annalee High, to talk about his travels abroad with students. As you heard last time, John has some very funny stories. Some are actually even true. Today, we're going to dive into that a little more.
Welcome to the Live Explore podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit like and subscribe.
I'm Alan Maceo, and this is the Live Better, Explore More podcast. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Alan. It's very nice to be back.
Great. Here we go. All right. So first, you're writing a book.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me, what's it like, to get to the first draft, hire an editor, and are editors mean?
Well, it was a humbling experience. Definitely not mean, unless you think that things that were going on in your own mind, when they get articulated by an editor, if you think that's mean because it's kind of blunt, kind of hurts, she basically told me, what you have here are two half books instead of one good book. I'm like, oh, that's a bummer. She said, yeah. She said, this book is about student travel and takeaways from each trip. And you have some really great stories there, but you also have things about your development as a young person in your travels by yourself that you're trying to dovetail back and forth. She goes, I just think that's two different books. So she said, really get thinking. And before school starts, I want you to pull out those things where you are a young person traveling on your own, discovering the world, and put that aside for a separate book. So I did that. And so now quantitatively, I have much less than a full book. I've got to get to work on, a few more travel anecdotes.
So, John, let's get right back to the, remember the first podcast I said, listen, keep the vocabulary simple. Yeah. So you drop an articulated and a quantitative already.
I'm so sorry, Alan.
Already.
I try my best.
I need a dictionary here, or a thesaurus or something to tell me what the heck you're talking about. But let's go back over a couple of the trips, because some of the questions I want to get into, that tie into the book, right, are like the story in Russia where you thought you were going to be paying in rubles and it was dollars.
Yeah.
Right? And then you had the trip where you had to get off the bus, but only you got off the bus instead of everybody.
Oh, yeah, that was
right.
Rough.
On the bus ride to off the cliff. Okay. So you've taken this book that you've written. Roughly how many pages did you have before the editor cut it up?
I had about 180 pages. I think I wanted the book to be about 220. So I wanted to have an editor get to it before I really put before I finished it, because I wanted to see if I was going in the right direction. And she basically said, you're going in the right direction. You have plenty of stuff, but you're not there yet. So then I had to edit it down from 180. Now I'm back down to about 110. So I got a lot of work to do.
Okay, so when the editor takes a look at this and gives you this critique, right, is it somewhat humbling, or is it like, wow, did you make you feel like you were back in high school getting ripped apart by the English teacher?
Well, it is humbling, but I paid her a lot of money, a lot for me. And so I told her I really wanted the hard truth. I didn't want her to, make me feel good like my friends can do. I mean, that's what you're for, Alan. You make me feel good because we have a good friendship. No, I wanted her to tell me like it was going to, what could be published. And she had a lot of experience. She has a lot of experience with the publishing world. She knows what gets published and what people read. And she just talked about it being more of a straight line. The feeling was, thank you for saying what I think I already knew, but I was afraid to say it to myself. Because when you write a book and you have all these pages and you've been working on it for a full year, you're so deep into the words that you don't necessarily even see it anymore. I don't know if it makes sense, but like the forest for the trees. Right. I'm looking at the trees so closely for so long that I don't have a sense of the forest until an editor says, hey, man, fix this because your forest looks like this, not that.
Okay, so what we're here to do then is to try to help you expand these stories.
Yeah,
okay?
Cool.
So since this is your first book, and not only that, but now you try to take one book and turn it into two.
Yeah.
And you think we're friends.
Now that I'm teaching full time, this is going to kind of take a while to develop. But I think when I finish teaching in about 4 years, I'm going to hammer both of these out pretty fast. Although I'm hoping one will be done long before that, but we'll see. We'll see. I got next summer.
There you go. Okay, let's get into it. So on some of these trips, I mean, we talked about this in the last podcast that, you're dealing with students that are teenagers, right? Mm-hmm. And, I know they hear well, they just don't necessarily listen well, right? And sometimes things happen. Was there a trip where you felt like you were a little naive?
Yes, definitely. The very first trip I ever took, this would have been in 2002, we landed in Berlin, and we checked into a hotel. It was late in the evening. I'm exhausted. I mean, after a transatlantic flight, I'm going right to bed. I made the naive assumption to think that students would go right to bed as well. Get this nice little keys to your room and go to sleep, and we are going to hit it tomorrow. It's going to be a great tour around Berlin. We all go to bed. I think everybody's sleeping. We get up at the assigned time. We get on the bus, and we drive out to King Frederick the Great's retreat out in a small town called Potsdam outside of Berlin. And we go to this beautiful retreat from Frederick the Great called Sans Souci, which in French means without worries. It was an escape for the King of Germany to get away from his worries, which I found incredibly ironic as this played out. Because one of the girls on the trip, I'll call her Ella, she wasn't feeling well. She was having trouble getting on the bus. She was having trouble. Her friend said, the plane was rough. She got dehydrated on the plane and she didn't drink enough water. Oh, okay, fine. We go into this beautiful library, books all around. And there's a German tour guide sharing with us the beautiful volumes and Frederick's life and his time with his friends. I guess Frederick the Great was gay, which at the time was a really big deal, that a king would have an escape for he and his friends or whatever to get away. And as I'm learning about this and I'm looking at my students and I'm so proud that I've put all this together, this girl, Ella, projectile vomits right on Frederick the Great's books. And the group looked at each other, our jaws dropped, like, oh God, please, this didn't just happen, what I think just happened. The German tour guide, I remember, looked around, looked at her, was so in shock she couldn't get herself to speak for what seemed like a very long time. And then she said, oh my gosh, this has never happened before. You all must leave at once. And so, we bow our heads in shame. We're walking out of the library, and we get to the bus, and the girls, Ella's friends, say, Mr. Grech, she was so sick. She was, on the plane and everything else. Well, it turned out she and her friends had been out partying all night. Some other students at our school that were not on our trip happened to touch down the day before, and they had learned the lay of the land and the bars. And in Germany, you can drink when you're a little younger than in the U.S., and so that's what they did. And they did it to excess, and I felt incredibly naive. Somehow, I continued running trips even after that mortifying experience.
So any other trips? I can't get past the projectile vomiting.
Oh, so just awful. I can't either, and it's 20 years later.
So, but any other trips where something like that happened? Maybe not the projectile part, but where you found out, oh my God, how could they have done that, right?
Well, I have a memory. Okay, to answer your question, we were in Ecuador. We had a tour guide showing us a beautiful part of a coastal city called Bahia de Caracas. And as part of the town, there's a beautiful obelisk. You can hike up to the top of the obelisk. And my students were at the top. I had gone to the top. Beautiful view. I had gone down to the bottom with the tour guide. We were chatting, talked to some other students. And some students were still at the top of the obelisk. And they decided to practice the accuracy of their spitting. And they're spitting off the obelisk, and they decide that the best target to practice their spitting on would be the Ecuadorian guide. And one of them was very accurate and hit him right on top of the head. The Ecuadorian guy came up to me. His name was Sixto, and he said, given the history of our two countries and all that your country has done to my country, this feels especially painful. I'm working so hard to show you guys the best trip I can, and that's the thanks I get? Oh, Alan, I was mortified, and I felt so terrible. I investigated who it was and why they did it. And it turned out that one of the assistant tour guides was in there, on it. And so I had to, apologize myself, get the students to apologize. That was just mortifying. But then there's also the kind of naivety where I'm ill-informed for what a tour guide needs to know. For example, we arrived in Istanbul one day. I should back up to a lesson that I'm teaching in class here in the States. I'm teaching a lesson on the invisible hand and the prices at which the buyers will meet the sellers. The number of buyers will equal the number of sellers, and how prices in a free market, in a capitalist society, the prices will go up and down based on supply and demand, where those supply and demand curves meet. That'll be the price level, and that changes. And I was trying to think of an example. What would be a good example for price levels rising and falling? And I thought, oh yeah, when I arrived in Turkey with 30 students or so, I had to deal with what I thought at the time was the Turkish mafia because of this free market concept. We checked into our hotel from the airport, and the hotel owner said to me, okay, great, here are all the keys. Kids all go up to the rooms. Good night, everybody goes to sleep. Now, just a matter of payment. I said, oh yes, I'll be paying with traveler's checks. For those of us of a certain age, you may remember traveler's checks where you put in the money at your bank account and then you sign before the trip, and then you co-sign on the trip. And I was going to give him roughly $10,000 for this big hotel bill. We were there for 4 nights. It was a lot of money. And I said, yeah, I'll be paying in traveler's checks. MasterCard, they'll be accepted. And the owner of the hotel laughed. And he said, oh, I don't know what that is. I'm not taking traveler's checks. I said, you're not taking traveler's checks? That could be a problem. I don't have $10,000 in cash. And he goes, well, this is a cash-only economy. You're in Turkey now. And I said, well, I don't know what to do. I have traveler's checks. He said, well, you can go to the bank. So the next day I went to the bank. The bank said, oh, yeah, we can cash $1,000 worth a day. But my bill was $10,000. I'm only there for 4 days. At best, I can get 4 of my $10,000. I'm $6,000 short. I'm in trouble. So I go back to the hotel and I go, well, I might be able to come up with $4,000 in cash. Could you take the rest in traveler's checks? He says, absolutely not. What you're going to do is you're going to go to my friend, and here's his address. You go down to my friend and you get the cash. So the next day, we were supposed to go to the Black Sea, beautiful resort north of town. So I put my whole group on the bus. They went to the Black Sea. They had a great time. I still have never seen the Black Sea because I was busy working out this problem. I go down to the address the guy gives me, and my heart sinks when I see that it's like a little plexiglass window on the side of the street. It's kind of a busy street, and it's just a window. So I knock on the window, the door and this guy pulls off the wood panel and he looks out. And I said, hi, I'd like to change some money. And he goes, how much? And I said, 10,000. And so he said, 10,000 lira. I said, no, this would be dollars. And at this point, he thought there was a language barrier. And he said, well, write it. So I wrote 10,000 US dollars. And I saw a little smile come over his face. He puts a finger, wait a minute, closes the door, and disappears for a minute. And then just down the block, a big door opens, and a guy, very, very wealthy, a lot of bling, a lot of necklaces. He looks out, and he beckons me to come in. I go in. He walks me down a long hallway into a big, beautiful, plush room. I sit down. He offers me tea, which is, of course, a Turkish tradition when you're doing business. This was way over and above what I had bargained for. There was only one exit. I realize I'm at this guy's mercy. He says, what can we do for you? He speaks perfect English. I say, well, I'm in a bit of a bind. I'm a teacher and, looking for, $10,000 cash. And I just have these traveler's checks. And he says, I think I can help you. Yes. We'll do it for 8% commission. Now I'm thinking about prices and negotiating. In Turkey, you negotiate 8%. I'm going into my mind. That's $800, 8% of 10 grand. That's $800, which I have not budgeted for. My group has not paid for. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I start to feel a little panic. And I say to him, look, I am a public school teacher. There is no way I could possibly come up with $800 over and above all the budgeting we did. He says, all right. I'm a businessman. I can work with you. How about 6%? I said, I just don't have the $600. Well, we go back and forth, and I don't know if I can leave or what's going to happen. But he says, all right, speak of Turkish businessmen kindly. I'm going to give you this for 4%. I said, fine. $400. I'll pay it. It's the best I could do. He goes, okay, great. Now I got to call this company and see if these ridiculous traveler's checks are valid. And I said, oh, but it's 2:00 in the morning back in California. He says, come on, I know what I'm doing. He pulls out this binder. He has pictures of traveler's checks. He calls some number in the middle of the night in the States. He runs my serial numbers on the traveler's checks by the people on the other end of the phone. He says, very good, fine. Now how would you like the money? I said, well, I'll take it in Turkish lira. So he pulls out on a table much like this one and piles up $10,000 worth of U.S. Turkish lira. It's literally covering this table. And he even throws in like a big, bag that we can stuff full of cash, Turkish cash. We zip it up. I say, thank you very much. I walk out. Now I'm on a busy street with more cash than I've ever been holding in my hand. And I don't know why, but I had this little panic attack where I thought somebody's going to kill me. He's probably going to kill me. He's probably going to shoot me and take the money. I mean, what I do. So as you know, Alan, from our days in baseball, I run pretty good. So I decided I'm going to run as fast as I can with this money up to the tourist police. By the time I get up the hill to the tourist police, I am sweating. I am panting. And the tourist policeman doesn't know whether to arrest me or whether to help me and support me and walk me back to my hotel room. He does neither. I get back to the hotel room. I say to the hotel owner, I'm really proud of myself. I got your cash, breathing really hard. And he's like, great. Unzip the bag, open it up, and put it out here on the table. We're on the sidewalk with people walking by. I'm like, you want to put cash on the table? He says, my friend, where do you think you are? The United States? Nobody here would dream of touching somebody else's cash on a picnic table. And I knew that wasn't true, but I thought, okay, when in Rome, do what the Romans do. I took it all out, piles of money. Luckily, it wasn't windy because it would have blown all the money away. And he said, he counted a few piles. He said, my friend, it all looks good. I think we're going to be fine. Let's go have a party. Let's go celebrate. Come up to the roof. My students came back a few hours later from the Black Sea and found us, well into a local party and invited everyone to join. We knew everybody by a first name basis by now, his friends and the Turks. And that's how it worked out. So this was my lesson for how prices are negotiable and how supply can meet demand. Yeah, it worked totally by naivete. Now, was this the Turkish mafia? I don't think so, but it sure felt like it.
You're still alive, so it couldn't have been the mafia.
Well, I don't know. They got my $400. Even the mafia does, business dealings, right? Anywhere. And that's how it felt. And again, it was unfamiliar. And we jump. I have a tendency to catastrophize where I just kind of go to the worst case scenario. It's probably how business was done in Turkey. Certainly traveler's checks were obsolete. I've never touched a traveler's check since then.
There you go. All right. Okay, so this is a great question to follow up with. You ever have to break the laws as the tour guide in another country?
I think it depends what the laws actually are. When I was in Nepal, there was a Maoist revolt going on in 2008. The Maoists, named after Mao Zedong, communist army. And when I say army, I mean very well armed. They had rifles at the ready. And the Maoists, when we arrived, had decided that public busing was forbidden. They were not allowing people in Kathmandu to get on public buses. Well, we had in advance booked a bus company. It wasn't a public bus, but it sure looked like a public bus to Maoists. So although I'm not breaking the law, Maoists took issue with the fact that there was a group on a bus. So with their machine guns, they stopped our bus. They banged on the door. They insisted on boarding our bus. They came onto the bus, 3 soldiers with rifles, came onto our bus and said to our tour guide in Nepali, "What the hell are you doing violating the Maoist bus boycott? You can't be on buses." And of course, our tour guide is explaining in very animated Nepali, these people are not in a public bus. This is a private tour. These people are Americans. And apparently the Nepali Maoist said, "Yeah, Americans. Yeah, right. Like an American would ever come here." They said, everybody tries that. Everybody says they're Americans. They're not Americans. Let me on this bus and let me see these people. So the tour guide lets them on the bus, and the Maoists with their machine guns are at the front of my bus. There's 3 of them, big burly soldiers. They're looking down the aisle of the bus, and I'm in the front row, and I turn around and I look at my group, and at least half of the people have tears streaming down their face because they're quite sure that we have alienated a rebel army that is now going to shoot us. But as soon as the soldiers saw our students bawling, they looked at our tour guide and they said something in Nepali, which our guide later translated as, "Oh shit, these people are clearly not Nepali. They're definitely Nepali. They're definitely Americans." So they looked back at our bus and they just said, "Welcome to Nepal. Thank you for coming." And then walked down and closed the doors and waved to us as we drove away. So I don't know if I broke a law. I guess I didn't break a law, but it was a little touch and go there for a few minutes. Yeah.
Oh my, these stories. I don't know how you can't have 3 books just on the stories alone. All right, listen, earlier we talked about, moments where you might have been naive on a trip as the trip leader. And this next topic is probably the Ecuadorian story, probably falls right in line about shame on a trip. Yeah. So first, define what you think would be, give us an example of shame on a trip. And you can use Ecuador since you already have, because that would be a good one.
Yeah, there's that, where if you know the history, the CIA doing all kinds of things in Latin American countries and people in Latin America feeling like the United States has exploited them. I mean, that's all background. I'm certainly not going to hold my students accountable, for things that our government has done years before. But if we move the action over to Nicaragua, there's always a danger of looking like the ugly American, especially when you have students who have left the United States for the first time. We were staying on an island in the middle of Lake Nicaragua called Ometepe, really beautiful, central, spiritual place to the Native Americans, where they believe it's the beginning of civilization. It's called the Eye of the Water's Eye. So they believe that lake is the center of all Earth and all creation. And we had these hosts that made us beautiful meals. The very first meal was a breakfast that was just lovely. All the tropical fruits, the beautiful fresh breads they had made themselves. They had spent hours before we had arisen for the morning to make sure that the breakfast was perfect. And our students got up and picked and ate a little bit and liked some and didn't like others, and then said, thank you, and walked away. And half of the food that had been made by people with far fewer resources than we had, half of the food was still there, and it was just left, I guess, to be thrown away. It was just kind of a thoughtful thing that, we Americans can take our food for granted. And the tour guide and I were pretty mortified by this insensitivity that our kids just didn't even think about how much work and thought and craft had gone into this breakfast. So we gathered up all of the food remaining on the table and we put it all in just plastic bags, and we kind of squeezed it all in so it kind of was a paste. And then we got on the bus to go to the next stop. And while the kids are sitting on the bus and we're driving on the Nicaraguan roads, the tour guide, who's an American guy, his name is Lucas Ocean. Some people will be familiar with him. He founded a nonprofit in Sebastopol called Global Student Embassy, which no longer exists. But Lucas was at the front of the bus, and he pulled out all the food that we had left, and it was a very large bag. I would say it was about 4 feet tall and 1 foot around. So it was like a massive tube. And he said, "Look, what we did back there as a group was really, really insensitive and ugly, and we can never let that happen again. When people put food in front of you in countries that have much less than we have, you need to really respect that this is special, and this is something that these people have done from the goodness of their heart, and they put a lot into it. And so that this never happens again, we are all going to eat this food," which had obviously over time become much less appetizing. And I'm going to give my students credit. They all felt the shame, and they all said, "Yeah, that's the right thing to do." And we ate every bite. All of us, took several bites we needed to drain that whole bag, and we ate it. And the rest of that trip, because that was the first day, the rest of that trip, we never left a morsel of food behind. So I'm very proud of that. And that's where a shame can become kind of a positive and a learning experience. I mean, that's what it is for students that are, 16, 17 years old. They don't give a thought to how food got on their table. So that's been a more central part of my lessons now that I'm here, food to table, that whole journey that food makes for us to be able to eat it.
So you got the Ecuadorian episode, now you got the Nicaraguan, and then you got the Germany episode of projectile vomiting. You're doing well. Do you have any trips you'd like to tell us that actually went right? No, let's don't. Nobody cares about that.
Yeah,
give us another one where you felt bad.
You raise a really good point. When things go wrong on a trip, that's what you remember.
Yeah,
and that's what you talk about. I mean, what's more boring when somebody comes home from a great trip and you say, "Hey, how was your trip?" And they go, "Oh, that was fine. It was all good. The planes were on time. The food was fine. Coffee in the morning was great." Like that's just not interesting. And so it's kind of a shame that we go to hiccups on a trip. So I feel bad about that. And I don't know. I've always wanted to highlight positives and learning experiences of trips without being negative. But there's something impulsive about going to things that went wrong. Yeah.
So, you know what? Maybe the Nicaraguan episode wasn't really a shame thing so much. It was really an education.
Right.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day.
Right.
Right.
And there's a lot to be learned from shame. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the projectile vomiting, too, could have been considered an education. Right. Long trip. You get
Absolutely.
off the plane.
In fact, if I could tell you what do you call it? An epilogue post that story. I'm sitting at a restaurant fairly recently. It might have been a couple years ago. And a woman in her late 30s, early 40s, she came up to me in the restaurant. She said, you Mr. Grech? I said, yeah. She said, hi, my name is Ella. And I don't know if you remember me, which I found very quaint because it was the most traumatic thing that ever happened to me on a trip. I'm like, oh, Ella, if you only knew how well I remember you. She said, yeah. She said, about that. She said, I want to tell you that has plagued me. It sort of haunted me, my whole life up to this point. She said, I'm a psychotherapist now. I have 2 kids. I have a family. And she said, I just want you to know that has never left my mind about how irresponsible and horrible I was. And I just want to tell you how sorry I am. And I just hope you can forgive me. And this is a common experience for a teacher years later. It's like delayed gratification, where I said to her, of course I can forgive you because I'm a high school teacher. Could you imagine if I couldn't forgive students for doing stupid things when they were in high school? We've all done stupid things when we were in high school. I think that's a fair statement that we look back on many years later and go, oh gosh, how could I have done that? And so, that's the footnote to it, that it was a learning experience for her. Absolutely. And you learn by shame, you learn by your mistakes. And that's a big part of high school and travel.
Okay. So how many times have you gotten in a fight?
I don't ever remember getting in a fight.
Don't lie. Come on. You're the leader of train wreck tours.
There were 2 students who got in a fight.
Oh.
Forgive me if I've told you the story the first time I visited, but it was in Russia. We got up one morning, and one of my students comes to the breakfast table with a black eye. And I say, what happened? And the whole group is, mum's the word. They look at each other. Oh, we're not telling him. We're keeping this in-house. Like, no, this could be a disaster. Are we in trouble? Are we fighting with Russians? Are we here having a fight with locals? Because if so, I need to know. We need to get the hell out of town because, all hell could break loose if this is unresolved. And the kids kind of looked at each other and they kind of nodded. And they said, okay, we can tell you this. We can tell you this much, Mr. Grech. We'll tell you that it was not a Russian. It had nothing to do with Russians. It was our guys. Turns out I learned at the end of the trip that it was two boys on the trip who had been close friends, and they were fighting over one of the girls on the trip. And one just punched the other right in the face, and fight broke out. I guess the rest of the group broke it up. And what was the learning experience? That, we have to have some channel of communication. I guess they told me enough. I'm sure alcohol played a part. But again, you can't watch them every minute. So, but I don't think I've ever gotten in a fight. I'm trying to think if it ever got close. I got in a fight in Brazil without students. Thank goodness. I wasn't in a fight. I shouldn't say that. But my friend who was showing me around, he got punched from behind, kind of sucker punched by a local who did not appreciate the local girls who had never seen a guy who didn't speak Portuguese before. That was me. They didn't appreciate me taking their attention. Again, it was attention like I was a freak. It wasn't like anything, sordid. It was just like, oh my gosh, there's a guy in our town, tiny little town, that doesn't speak Portuguese. Like, you got to see this freak, like a circus freak. And a guy in town, felt neglected by, I guess, the girls in the town, and he just punched my friend, and we had to get the hell out of that town fast. But that didn't involve my students. We usually stick to big cities, which are a little more cosmopolitan, a little more, I guess, used to foreigners, let's say.
Okay. And you stayed a place too long?
Yes. This is a story that does involve a swear word, and there's no way to tell it without the swear word.
Hang on a second. Oh, Dallas, you going to be okay with this? For those you can't see, we have a 20-year-old running the cameras for us. And
no, it's
she's a little sensitive about using words like articulated.
What happened was I made the mistake on that trip to Turkey of not staying in Turkey. Turkey was exotic, exciting, historical, so adventurous. Just loved it. But in my itinerary, I had us taking a boat the second half of the trip over to the Greek islands, which sounded good on paper. But if you've never been to the Greek islands, they are about the most beautiful romantic spots on the planet. They're just spectacular. We went to a place called Santorini, which is those white buildings on a old volcanic crater, looking down the cliffs as far as you can see at the ocean. And it was magnificent, but it was kind of like romantic magnificent, like not the kind of place you bring high school students to study history or whatever I was thinking I was doing. And of course, we're on this island called Samos. And when you're on these islands, you're dependent on the ferries to pick you up and bring you to the next island. Well, the ferry got canceled for whatever reason. We were stranded on this island of Samos. The only thing I can remember about Samos, besides how beautiful it was that it's where Pythagoras was from, the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and they're very proud on this island. And it's also the furthest Greek island to the east, so that there's a lot of Turkish immigrants coming to the European Union illegally. But that's not really part of the story. We're on this island, beautiful. We had rented, mopeds on our own, et cetera, et cetera. But after 3 or 4 days, students are getting bored. And when high school students get bored on a romantic Greek island, things start to happen. So we're at dinner one night at a Greek restaurant, and the restaurant owner comes up to me and another chaperone at the table with many students at the table. He says, "Are you the leader of this group?" In sort of broken English. And I said, why, yes, I am, thinking that he's like, oh, it's such a nice group. Thank you for coming to our restaurant. Oh, that's not what he was going to say. He said, well, I'm sorry to say, but you have 2 students back in the stairwell behind that door there. How do you say in English? Fucking? And I went, oh my God. And I leaped up and I ran to the door and I opened the door to the stairwell, and the students had gotten word, or they had gotten seen. They were gone. There was nobody there. But it turned out that we had been on that island too long and couples were forming, and I don't know. They lack privacy. They don't have private rooms, whatever. But the worst thing that can happen for a chaperone is, I don't know, a pregnancy occurs or something. Like, how would you explain that to parents? That didn't happen. I didn't catch anyone, red-handed, happy to say. But that's when I knew it was time to desperately find a ferry and get the heck off that island. Because these things, they come to pass when you're at a beach and you're at a beach too long. And again, why are we going to beaches? We have beautiful beaches in California. Why? I'm not going around the world for beaches, but these are things you learn as you go, and you learn to really schedule things out to stick to that theme of, in my case, history. And if you're going to go to Greece for history, go to Athens. Don't be going to romantic volcanic, islands. Yeah.
Whose idea was to go to Santorini?
It was mine. I saw pictures of it and I said, oh, that's a place I've got to see. And there are incredible boat rides about the formation of a volcano and how it erodes. Like if you go to Kauai is an ancient volcano that is eroding, and I think it's Waimea Canyon in there. Probably a lot of Americans have been there. And you're looking at landscape that's just so spectacular, you can't believe it. And that was my thinking. Like, I want to see this natural place. I didn't read the room quite right. The room is, these are high school students. It's not about magnificent beauty. It's about being kept busy and learning, culture and travel. So they did take a beautiful boat ride around and learned about how the erosion, happens and how volcanoes disappear over, millions or thousands of years, whatever. And so that was great. But again, how could I know I was going to be stranded on an island, which is expensive, by the way, because then you have to pay for more hotels and you don't get a refund on the next island where you didn't get to, make it because of a ferry. I mean, the hotel owners, it's not their problem that the ferry didn't show up. And, in my group, it's $1,000 or whatever, for that night, whatever it was. So that's live and learn. Now I plan my trips out. There could be a couple hours of freedom, but I make sure that I have backup transportation. I make sure that, if this doesn't work out, we at least have that possibility. You have to think a little more like that. And that's part of teaching too. If you don't have access to your technology, I have a backup lesson. That's kind of teaching 101, especially when you're traveling.
There you go. You ever have to cancel a trip because of maybe current events in a country or something?
If people are paying attention to what's going on in Ecuador right now, I'm trying to organize a trip on bamboo construction and sustainable architecture. But one of the presidential candidates in Ecuador was just assassinated, and apparently there's a gang war going on in the prisons, and 50 or 60 prisoners were killed in the city of Guayaquil, which was where we would, probably land. Obviously, I'm calling that off until I feel like Ecuador has calmed down. The mayor of Manta, the city near we were, he was also killed. And so there's a lot going on that I can't possibly have my finger on the pulse of. But, I mean, this is safety 101. You can't possibly take students to a place where that kind of thing is going on. Although, getting back to that Maoist revolt in Nepal, we had planned that trip. And when the Maoist revolt happened, we were still in the States. So I called sort of an emergency meeting of all the people who had signed up for the trip. And I said, what do you guys think? I mean, are we going to do this? I mean, of course, I'd have to give you your money back. A Maoist revolt. We can't just go. Not one person canceled. Every family was like, yeah, from what we're reading, it's going to be okay. It's kind of out in the hinterlands. It's not really, going to affect you directly. So, nobody canceled. Everybody came knowing that it was a little bit unstable. It's hard to gauge instability when we're still in the States because, remember, our news organizations are not so much in the business of informing as they are in the business of making money. And the way they make money is by going into echo chambers and stoking our fears and making all these threats around the world or even closer to home a little bit exaggerated. For a good example would be the hurricane that just went through Los Angeles. I mean, it rained heavy, but for the days before, they're like, oh my gosh, it's going to cause, flooding and deaths and misery and all this stuff. And I think it was a heavy rain for a day or so, 2 days. really. And then the storm dissipated as it went north. It's just an example of they've got to make us scared because that's what sells, right? If it bleeds, it leads is kind of the acronym or the kind of the slogan of media, mass media. If it bleeds, it leads. And so when you're planning a trip overseas, you can't cross-check how accurate and how dangerous it really is. And you almost have to kind of assume the worst, which, I try not to do because Americans do that too often anyway. In the summer, it was all doom and gloom about how hot Europe was this last summer.
Right.
And, I admit I was really happy I wasn't in Italy or Greece this summer when it was 110, 120 degrees. It just sounds miserable. And all these pictures of people just shoulder to shoulder waiting in line, direct sun. I'm thinking, my gosh, people are going to be dropping over of heat stroke, which they were. But I think when you're there, you take precautions, you go air conditioning, you take a siesta. I mean, whatever it is, you take care of yourselves, and it's not hard to avoid danger, whether it's heat or crime or whatever. But I've never full on canceled the trip, I guess. I've canceled like parts of a trip, like just up in Oregon. We were going up to Crater Lake, but our van's about a mile short of the actual lake. Our vans were skidding around on the ice, and we just couldn't get them up anymore. So we didn't, we weren't able to see Crater Lake on one of the trips. Those are things that you play by ear, you improvise. You go with the flow. You go with what's safe. And I have to make calls that sometimes are unpopular. Like, guys, we're just not going to do that because I think it's dangerous. And of course, kids have no sense of danger because they're immortal. When you're 18 or 16 years old,
bulletproof.
You're bulletproof. You're never going to die. I mean, just come on, let's go. Let's do this. Things like street. What do you call those? Zip lining.
Zip lining. Yeah.
Yeah. As long as those are done, safely, they're fine. We've done some zip lining, but that's a recipe for death if that's not done right. So I'm the one who has to look at, hey, is this safe? Because if it's not, I don't care how unpopular I'm going to be. We're not going to do it. For example, here's an example of that. In Nicaragua, on that lake, there's a place called Monkey Island. Monkeys were put on this island. It's a very tiny island. It's basically like a big rock. And monkeys were put on this island years ago. I don't know why, as pets or something. And the locals are like, hey, you ought to come out and go see these monkeys. So I went with my daughter, who was on a student trip, and one of the students. Me and the two of them went with this 14-year-old tour guide. Now, nothing against 14-year-olds, but I don't think their judgment's sometimes the best. So we get in these little kayaks, canoes, and we paddle out to this island. And the tour guide saying, he's calling the monkeys, come on, monkeys, and they're not coming. So he says, okay, I'm gonna get some food over here. You guys get off the boat on the island, and I'll go get some food. So I'm like, okay, that's a little concerning, but okay. So we pull up in this little sand bar, and we get out of the boat, and we're standing, I don't know, a few steps above the boats, and now I see the monkeys, and the monkeys have teeth, and they're very loud, and they are smart, and I notice that they're getting closer to us in a very calculated military formation. Like I imagined, Dunkirk, where the Germans are surrounding them on the beachhead, and they're like, "Dang, we need to rescue fast." And these monkeys, they're loud and they're showing their teeth, and they're clearly not happy we're there, and they're even more unhappy that we don't have food to throw to them. And so I get the girls who are probably 8 years old. My daughter was 8. The student was probably 12 or 13. And I get them behind me, and all I have is a paddle. And these monkeys are getting closer and closer, and I'm telling them to get on the boat quickly and shove off. And as they're doing that, the monkeys are getting closer and closer and louder and louder. And now they start, I don't know, there's 40 of them. There's 40, let's say 40 monkeys. And now they're biting me. They want me dead. And I'm with a paddle. And now I'm in a panic. And I'm fighting it. I'm hitting monkeys with the paddle. And I think I'm about to die. And I fall down the steps, at the base of the boats. And I start bleeding. And at this moment, the 14-year-old tour guide, comes back and goes, "Oh, what's going on?" And he starts throwing out some food and probably saved my life. I'm able to get on the boat. And I'm able to, get back in the water. And I say to the kid, "Oh my, what were you thinking?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't know. I thought it'd be fine. It's kind of interesting. Monkeys are cool. Monkeys are safe." I get back to the hotel, and this kid's father is the owner of the hotel. And he sees me bleeding from my arms and elbows and face. And he's like, the father looks at me and he said to me in Spanish something like, did my kid take you to Monkey Island? And I said, yeah. And he goes, doggone that kid. The other guy from California is still in the hospital. So he goes running off to scold his child, and I'm nursing my wounds thinking, what the hell? So obviously I said to my group who came back from some other thing, I said, hey guys, no matter what you hear, you are not to go to Monkey Island. Look what it did to me. Well, of course, that's intriguing to my students. I mean, they were going out there a little more wisely than I did because they had warning. But yeah, I make rules. I don't know if they went to Monkey Island or not. Some students said, yeah, we snuck out there in the night. Monkeys were fine. But I think they were just making it up. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's naive on my part, scary on my part. It's a fight.
You didn't win either.
No, I
guess
didn't.
You survived.
I didn't
That's a
win,
win.
but I survived.
There you go.
Those monkeys they had been through this before, and they knew how to fight, and they knew how to be in the right formation. They were equidistant from each other, just like I imagine, a tank battle.
Oh my God. Jeez. All right, let's circle back to the book. So how long have you been planning to write a book? Right?
Well, yeah, that goes back many years, but I finally put pen to paper on this one 15 months ago. And I took a year off of school. I felt like I had enough money. There was a little bit of instability with the closing of El Molino, merging in with Annalee. And I just thought, after a year at Annalee, I thought, I'm going to take a year to let that settle. And I'm going to go do some things that I've always wanted to do in my life. One is, read a lot of books. The other is travel to some countries I hadn't been traveling to. And the third is, write a book. And so I did my best. There were several days where the travels were too fun to actually sit down and write. And I met too many cool people and fun people that would take me around for me to say, no, you guys go ahead. I have to work on my book. I wasn't really in that frame of mind, but I wrote a lot. Unfortunately, I wasn't organized enough in terms of that storyline. What my editor said that really makes sense, and it relates to these podcasts. She said, when we talk, we can jump back and forth between subjects, and it's fine. We can go from Nicaragua to Ecuador to Berlin. Like, that's no problem in a conversation. But when you're writing a book, there has to be a theme that you're sticking with the whole time. And she said, what I think your theme is in your book is, when I travel with students, we have these crazy experiences, good and bad, and we all have a takeaway from those experiences. And what the book is, what those takeaways are. What do students learn? What did you learn? That's what the point of the book is, right? If you're jumping back and forth in time to your youth and your growth, or into your classroom, or onto your Grech quotes, website, or whatever, if you're jumping around, which I was trying to do, she said, it doesn't work in a book, but it does work in a podcast. And you definitely want podcasts to introduce potential readers to your book. So whenever your book does get published, people have heard of you, like, oh, that's that guy I heard on a podcast. Fine. So you can do that, and you can jump all over the place when you're talking, but you gotta rein it in when you're writing. And she's right. She's absolutely right about that. As I proofread it and I looked at it, and I showed my friends like a couple of chapters neck and neck, they would kind of say, yeah, it's awesome. Like, I love reading the whole thing, but the two don't really fit together. Like, oh, okay. Yeah, live and learn.
So what's the name of this book? Do you have a name for it yet, or is that at the end of the writing, do you come up with a title, or?
I very deliberately called it Untitled so far. I don't want to screw it up. The title has to be really good. It has to nail something down. There are certain words I'd love to be in the title, but I've not figured it out yet. I want it to be something about light, the double entendre of the word light, to be traveling light and to see the light. I like those two uses of the word light, but I've got like 10 different possibilities using the word light, or maybe I'll throw the word light out. So no, I don't want to title it until I've really written it.
So light in its projectile form?
Yeah. That was the worst of the worst, I will say. And it was my very first trip, and so I'm really glad I got through that. I'm really glad I ran another trip. I had a couple other students on that trip, and they say, we owed you more. We should have been better. We owed future travelers with you more, because we took a chance of you never running another trip again. And so, we're really sorry. You know, and now they have me over for dinner, and they're like, no, please let us make up for it. It's very sweet now that people are in their 30s and 40s. Now they're adults and their cerebral cortex is closed. They can reason a little better. My dad says, why don't you run trips for adults? They can pay a lot more money. You don't care if they drink, and you don't have to be responsible for their safety and all that. That's on them. Why don't you run those trips? That's kind of tempting, but adults, I don't know. Older people have standards and they complain a lot. High school students don't complain, like, ever. They just make the best of any situation. And I'm a high school teacher at heart, for sure. So we'll see. Maybe after my teaching career, I'll start running, tours, Grech style for, people that are a little more mature.
Oh, my God, that's funny. All right, last question. Ecuador obviously is dicey at best at being pulled off. Anything else down the road that, even if you haven't gotten it nailed down, you kind of are targeting?
Well, I really would like to explore India. I've never been to India. I've had a lot of students who have come from India, and they've given me some really good inside, host possibilities and cities I want to see. India presents some logistical, challenges for groups, namely the heat and the infrastructure, the travel between cities. I'm not sure how to make that happen, but I'm fascinated with India. And then, Southeast Asia, I have another trip to Vietnam in me for sure. But Vietnam cannot, and I'm afraid it can't really be done in the summer. It's just too hot and humid. Literally, we're talking heat stroke kind of issues. So I have to work out, how I could go a different time of year to Vietnam. And then the other place that I'm just fascinated by is South Africa. Again, I haven't been there. Places I've been that I want to take students would be Iceland. Viking history would be really fascinating, and the infrastructure there is perfect. It's one of the smoothest countries I've ever been to. And Spain. Spain has incredible history, and I've never taken students there. It's a little bit too on the beaten track, maybe, like too many tourists. I've always tried to go to places that are a little more, exotic or off the beaten track, or just a little bit less traveled.
Right.
So I don't know. We'll see. And some of it depends on the organizations that I want to work with that might, give me a theme that I really want to work with in terms of the environmentalism. I'm kind of into looking at how other countries approach a more sustainable environmental policy and things like that. Because some other countries, particularly in Europe, are quite a bit ahead of the United States. I think that would be a really worthwhile thing to look at. And that's part of Nicaragua and Ecuador too. They're doing some amazing things with bamboo construction that I want to teach more about. So many possibilities, Alan.
There you go.
Yeah.
Maybe the next time we do a podcast, we get your editor on here, and you two can fight it out, and I can check the list. He had a fight.
Finally, he had a fight.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
It's actually his fight, not one of his students.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting. Different perspectives on the stages of publishing a book.
There you go. All right, John, listen, great to be with you again. Thanks a lot. Let's get together again in the future. I'm serious about the editor. I think that might, depending on where you are in the book, that might be a lot of fun to have your editor come in and tell us.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I feel like you bring out the best in your guests. So, thanks.
Thank you. All right, that's it.